Episode 1: The Stranger Behind the Curtain. The church was silent that evening, the kind of silence that presses against your skin until you can hear your own blood moving. Father Anselm had almost locked the heavy oak doors when a hand stopped him, thin, pale, trembling. A man in a dark coat slipped inside without a word, heading straight to the confessional. Anselm followed, his heart already uneasy. He lit a single candle, its flame bending as though recoiling from something unseen. Then he stepped into his side of the confessional, slid the lattice shut, and waited. At first nothing, just breathing, slow, careful. Then a voice, low, raspy, as though dragged up from the grave, broke the silence. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The words were ordinary yet wrong, not because of the tone but because of what followed. "When I was 12, I stole the chalice from the sacristy. I buried it behind the orchard so no one would find out." Father Anselm froze, his lungs locked in his chest. He had stolen the chalice when he was 12. He had hidden it beneath the orchard's soil, his shame buried along with it. No soul alive knew of it, not his mentors, not his God. He had never confessed. He whispered, his throat tight, "Who told you that?" The man chuckled, though it was not laughter. It was recognition. "I told you. I am telling you now." The wood of the confessional groaned as if something heavy pressed against it. Candlelight flickered violently, shadows dancing like hands clawing through the lattice. Anselm tried to steady his voice. "This is no jest. Speak your own sins, not mine." But the voice ignored him. "When I was 24, I watched the orphan boy fall from the bell tower. I didn't scream. I didn't save him. I let silence swallow him. And then I said nothing." Anselm's pulse thundered. The memory he had buried deep clawed its way back. The boy's body broken on the stones. The shame he had stitched into silence. How could this stranger know? He leaned close to the lattice. "Who are you?" he hissed. The breathing on the other side turned ragged, like someone tearing open their chest to let out a secret. Then a whisper, softer than breath itself. "I am you, Father. I am every word you swallowed, every sin you buried, every silence you wore like a mask." The candle went out. The church was swallowed whole by darkness. And in that void, Father Anselm felt something, an unseen presence leaning close, lips almost at his ear, waiting to confess what he feared most, the truth. Episode 2: The Voice That Knew My Name. The next night, Father Anselm told himself it had been exhaustion, a trick of the mind. He sprinkled holy water around the church, whispering prayers with trembling lips. Yet when the last candle was extinguished and the pews sat in shadow, the memory of that voice still coiled inside him like smoke that would not clear. He had just finished evening prayers when he heard the confessional door creak, his blood iced. He had not seen anyone enter the church. Still, he rose, each step toward the booth heavier than the last. The moment he sat down, before he could even draw a breath, it spoke. "Good evening, Anselm." The name cracked across his spine. No one had used it without the title of Father in years. And the voice, it was not muffled by the lattice this time. It slid through as though the wood were nothing. His hands tightened on his rosary until the beads dug into his skin. "You will not speak my name here," he snapped. "Who are you to?" "I am the memory you buried in the orchard, the silence you carried from the tower, the shadow you see on the altar. I know every name you have worn, and the one you will die with." A chill gust swept through the booth, though no door had opened. The candle outside sputtered and died, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight spilling through stained glass, fractured into blood-red and ash-gray patterns. Anselm's voice trembled despite his will. This is not confession. This is blasphemy." The thing chuckled low, like a blade dragged against stone. "Blasphemy? No, Father. This is truth, and truth will kneel before no altar." The wood between them rattled as though invisible hands clawed from the other side. Then silence, heavy, suffocating. Anselm pressed his ear to the lattice. Nothing, only the sound of his own heart. Slowly, he pushed open the confessional door and stepped into the nave. Empty pews, silent air. But then, from the very heart of the church came the whisper again. Not from the booth, not from the shadows, from everywhere at once. "Anselm, my son." The crucifix above the altar groaned on its hooks. Christ's wooden mouth seemed to part just slightly, as if ready to speak again. And in that moment, Father Anselm realized the most terrifying truth. The church itself had begun to remember his sins. Episode 3, The Sin I Never Spoke. Father Anselm did not sleep that night. He walked the church aisles in circles, clutching his rosary until the cross cut into his palm. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every flicker of candlelight looked like lips moving in silent mockery. By dawn, he told himself it was madness. Perhaps age was unraveling his mind. Perhaps grief long buried had come to devour him. But when night fell again, he found himself drawn, helplessly, like a moth to fire, back to the confessional. He slid inside, forcing his lungs to steady. Silence. Then the scrape of wood as the unseen presence settled into the other side. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," the voice whispered. Anselm shut his eyes, gripping the lattice. "Then speak, and may God free you from it." The voice chuckled. "This one you have never spoken, not even to him." And then it began. "When the plague came, you abandoned the sick. You barred the chapel doors and prayed their screams would fade. You told yourself it was survival, but it was cowardice. And they died with your prayers echoing in their ears." Anselm's throat closed, his lips parted, but no denial came. He had locked the doors. He had silenced their pleas with hymns sung alone in the dark. And no one, not a single soul, had ever known. His chest burned as though the words themselves branded him. You cannot know this. I never confessed it." "No," the voice breathed, trembling with delight. "But your silence confessed for you. Every time you touched the altar, every time you lifted the host, I heard it." The wood between them began to splinter, a crack running down the confessional wall as if the truth itself demanded space to enter. The scent of rot filled the booth. Anselm pressed his back against the panel, shaking. "You are no penitent. You are a spirit sent to torment me." The voice grew louder, layered, as though 1,000 mouths spoke through one. "I am your sin. Father, I do not vanish when you hide me. I grow." And then, silence, heavy, smothering. When Anselm finally dared open the door, he found no one. Only the crack in the wood, still fresh, still bleeding resin like an open wound. But on the floor before the altar lay something far worse. A single communion wafer, stained with the thumbprint of blood. His thumb. Episode 4. Whispers in the Empty Church. The crack in the confessional had not healed. Each time Father Anselm walked past it, he swore the wood widened, just enough to whisper. He sealed it with holy oil, pressed his trembling hand against the split, and prayed. But oil dried, splinters spread, and the whispering never ceased. It began in the evenings, when the pews lay deserted and the candles melted down to nubs. At first it was only fragments, murmurs, like the shuffle of distant voices. But one night, when Anselm paused at the altar, the voices rose together in unholy harmony. "Forgive me, Father." He turned sharply. The church was empty. "For I have sinned." The words came not from the booth, not from one mouth, but from the rafters, the walls, the stones beneath his feet. The whole church breathed them. Anselm dropped to his knees, clutching his cross. "In the name of Christ, be gone," he shouted. His voice rang hollow in the nave, swallowed by the echoes of countless unseen throats. And then he heard it, one voice above the others, clear, deliberate. "When the boy fell, you did not shout, you did not run, you let silence bury him." Anselm's blood ran cold. His secret, again, dragged into the open air by voices that should not know it. Desperate, he fled down the aisle. But as he passed the pews, whispers licked at his ears. Each bench seemed to carry its own confession. A theft, a betrayal, a murder. Hundreds of sins filling the air, thick as incense. Yet every one of them ended the same. "I am you, Father. I am your silence." The crucifix above the altar groaned. The nails holding Christ's body rattled, as if straining. For an instant, Anselm thought the carved figure would unhook itself and step down. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own robes, his breath ragged. The church was no longer a house of God. It was a mouth, opening wider with every whisper, ready to swallow him whole. And in that suffocating dark, one final voice coiled into his ear, tender as a lover and cruel as damnation. "You are not confessor, Anselm. You are the confessed." Episode 5. The Shadow That Crossed the Altar. By the fifth night, Father Anselm's prayers had become frantic bargains. He no longer asked for peace. He begged for silence, but silence never came. It slithered away from him, replaced by whispers that grew louder with every candle he lit. That evening, the church felt swollen with darkness, as if the walls themselves had inhaled and refused to exhale. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wax and something fouler, like blood left too long in the sun. Anselm stood at the altar, clutching the chalice with white-knuckled hands. His voice trembled through the liturgy, though the pews were empty. He prayed louder than necessary, as though trying to smother the unseen audience. And then it happened. From the corner of his eye, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It glided across the marble floor, long and sharp, though no one stood to cast it. It moved with purpose, slow and deliberate, heading straight for the altar. Anselm froze. His own shadow lay at his feet, bent by candlelight. But this one matched his form perfectly, every curve of his shoulders, every fold of his robes, and yet his body did not move. It walked without him. The figure's head turned, tilting toward the crucifix. For a heartbeat, Anselm thought he saw the wooden Christ incline his head in acknowledgement. "No," Anselm whispered, stepping back. "This is deceit. This is illusion." The shadow climbed the steps of the altar. Its hands rose, mirroring his, though Anselm's own arms remained pinned to his sides. The chalice trembled in his grip as if trying to leap toward that phantom double. Then the voice came, not from the confessional, not from the walls, but from the shadow itself. "When you prayed for the plague to pass, you did not ask for mercy. You asked to be spared. Alone. You prayed for yourself." Anselm's knees buckled. The chalice slipped, wine spilling across the altar like fresh blood. The shadow bent over it, and for the first time, it smiled, a grin sharp and wide, carved into darkness. The candles guttered, bowing as though in worship. The church no longer echoed his prayer. It echoed his silence. And Father Anselm, staring at the figure that bore his own outline, knew the truth with a terror too vast to name. The church no longer needed him. It had found another Anselm. Episode 6, The Dead Man's Confession. Father Anselm could no longer bear the church at night. By day, its stained glass glowed with holy light, but by dusk it became a prison of echoes. The shadow had returned each evening since, pacing across the altar as if rehearsing for some unholy liturgy. Desperate for answers, Anselm descended into the archives beneath the sacristy. Dust-choked shelves stacked with parish records, birth ledgers, and brittle death registers. If the voice that haunted him belonged to a soul, he would find its name written here. By lantern light, he turned page after page, the silence below heavier than any he had endured upstairs. His hands trembled as he traced dates long forgotten, until a line of ink stopped him cold. Confessor, Father Anselm. Penitent, Elias Vane. Status, deceased. His eyes narrowed. Deceased? The entry was dated 30 years earlier. But he remembered the name, Elias Vane, the man who had come to him in the confessional, whispering sins with a trembling tongue. Anselm had heard his voice only once, the very night Elias died in the river, dragged under by the current before dawn. And yet, the same voice now plagued him. Anselm stumbled back, the lantern nearly falling from his grasp. His mind clawed for reason, a trick, a forgery, some cruel jest by another priest. But when he turned the page, his breath caught. There were more entries, more penitents, each marked deceased, each one written in his own careful hand. And beneath them, a final line in ink too fresh, too wet to be decades old. Confessor, Father Anselm. Penitent, Father Anselm. Status pending. The lantern flickered violently. A cold breath rippled across the pages, though no draft stirred the cellar air. Then, in the dark, he heard it. "You wrote me here. Father, you sealed my death with silence, but the dead do not forget. They confess until someone listens." The voice was not behind him. It was beneath him, seeping through the stones of the crypt, rising like water through cracks. Anselm's knees weakened. He dropped the lantern, its flame smothered on the ground, leaving him in total blackness. And in that choking dark, another voice joined the first, then another, then a dozen more. Every penitent he had ever buried. Every silence he had chosen over truth, all of them confessing at once, their words filling the cellar until the air itself grew heavy with guilt. And at the center of it, Elias whispered again, clear as the day he drowned. Your confession, Father, is still waiting. Episode 7. The Blood on My Hands. Father Anselm no longer trusted his own reflection. In the basin of holy water, in the polished brass of the censer, he saw eyes that were his, yet not his, tired, guilty, watchful. Every night, the whispers grew bolder. Every night, Elias's voice returned, peeling back sins Anselm thought had died with the past. But this night, it was different. He had just lowered himself into the confessional when the air turned sour, damp, as though the booth had been dragged beneath the river. His breath misted in the chill, and then the voice began. Forgive me, Father, for I will sin. The words twisted his stomach. Not have sinned, will. Tonight, you will take a blade and still the life of Brother Matthias. You will bury the knife behind the orchard, where once you buried the chalice. You will do it in silence, as you have always done. Anselm gripped the lattice, fury choking his throat. Lies, I would never. But his words faltered, for he remembered the orchard, remembered the chalice, remembered every silence that had become a grave. The voice continued, unhurried, savoring each word. And when you wake, Father, you will find blood on your hands. You will not know if it was dream or deed, but the stain will cling to you. Because sin is not erased by denial. It seeps. The confessional shuddered. Resin bled from the cracks in the wood, thick and red as blood. Anselm stumbled out into the nave, gasping for breath. The church was empty, silent, still. Shaking, he pressed both hands to his face, whispering prayers until exhaustion forced him into uneasy sleep on the stone floor. When dawn bled through the windows, he woke with his palms sticky, crusted. In horror, he pulled them away. Dark streaks of dried blood webbed across his fingers, staining the lines of his skin. He staggered to his feet, frantic, searching for a wound. None, not a scratch. His body was untouched, and yet the blood was real. The church was silent. The crucifix loomed above him, but the carved Christ's eyes seemed sharper, almost watchful. And then, in the pit of his soul, he understood the cruelty of it. The confessions were no longer of the past. They were of the future. And he, Father Anselm, was already guilty of sins he had not yet committed. Episode 8. The Parishioner Who Vanished. The blood would not wash away. Father Anselm scrubbed until his skin burned raw, but the stains clung to his hands like a second skin. He hid them beneath gloves during Mass, his trembling voice breaking between verses of the liturgy. The parishioners noticed. Of course, they whispered of age, of sickness, of curses, but one voice rose above the murmurs. Her name was Clara, a devout girl of 20. She often stayed long after Mass, kneeling until the candles drowned in their own wax. That night, she came to the confessional. Her steps were light, but her presence pressed against the air like thunder before the storm. Anselm steadied himself, sliding into the booth. Speak, my child, he said, though his voice was hoarse, almost begging. Silence, then her whisper. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. At first her words stumbled, hesitant, but then her voice changed, flattened, deepened, until it no longer belonged to her. When the boy fell from the tower, you turned away. When the plague came, you locked the doors. When the blood stained your hands, you hid them beneath gloves. Anselm's heart froze. Those were his sins, not hers. Clara's body trembled, her voice breaking as if she fought for control. She gasped for breath, then cried out, not in her own tone but in Elias's rasp. I confess for him. I confess what he will not speak. The booth shuddered violently. Clara screamed, then silence swallowed the cry. Anselm tore open the door. Her side of the confessional was empty. No trace, only the faint smell of river water, damp and suffocating. He searched the nave, the pews, the sacristy. Nothing. Clara was gone, as if the church itself had devoured her. By dawn, her family stormed the chapel, frantic. She came here last night. Her mother wept. She never came home. Anselm stood mute, his gloves sticky with fresh stains that no water could remove. Later, when he retreated to his chambers, he found her journal placed neatly on his desk. The pages smelled of mildew. In her careful hand, the last line read, Father confessed through me tonight. His sins tore through my lips like they were my own. I am afraid he will not stop. The ink was still wet. Episode 9. The Walls That Listened. After Clara's disappearance, Father Anselm avoided the confessional. He barred its door with chains and sealed it with wax from the altar candles. But still he heard whispers seeping through the cracks at night, as if wood itself could not contain them. He turned instead to the stone of the church, pressing his forehead against the cold walls as he prayed for mercy. Yet soon, even the walls began to answer. It started faintly, scratches, too deliberate to be the settling of old stone. Then words etched themselves into the mortar, curling across the surface like veins. One morning, as dawn light crept through the stained glass, Anselm saw them clearly. I locked the doors while they screamed. His stomach lurched. The sentence was his sin, written not in ink but carved into the very wall, each letter deep as though gouged by invisible nails. He pressed trembling fingers against the grooves. Dust clung to his gloves like ash from a burned confession. By nightfall, more words spread across the church, on pillars, beneath pews, even across the steps of the altar. I watched the boy fall. I prayed only for myself. Her voice was not her own. Anselm staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Every silence he had harbored, every cowardice, every shadow of guilt, etched into stone for all to see. Yet no one else noticed. Parishioners sat upon pews carved with damnation, their eyes sliding past the words as if blind. Only he could see, only he could read. That night, as he tried to scrub the altar steps, the letters bled. Not dust this time, not ash, but liquid, dark and thick, soaking into his rag. He dropped it in horror. The words pulsed, oozing as though the stones themselves had veins. And then the church groaned, a long, low moan that trembled through the floorboards. "We have listened, Father." The voices breathed from every wall. "We will not forget." Anselm fell to his knees, pressing his hands over his ears, but it was no use. The stone spoke through bone, through marrow, and as the last candle choked itself to smoke, a line etched itself across the great wall behind the crucifix, fresh and gleaming like a wound. Next sin to be spoken. Episode 10, The Sermon That Wasn't Mine. Sunday morning arrived with cruel inevitability. Father Anselm had not slept. His eyes burned red. His hands trembled beneath the gloves that no longer hid the stains. Still, the bells tolled and the faithful gathered. They came with bowed heads and trusting hearts, expecting the word of God. He climbed the pulpit with knees that buckled beneath his weight. The air felt heavy, charged, as though the church itself waited to hear what he would say. He gripped the lectern, cleared his throat, and began, "Beloved in Christ." But the voice that rolled across the nave was not his. It was deeper, ragged, soaked with rot and river water. The congregation shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, but their eyes were caught, fixed by the words that poured from his mouth. I locked the doors while they screamed. The blood drained from Anselm's face. He tried to stop, to close his lips, but his jaw moved without him, tongue and throat twisting against his will. I let the boy fall. I prayed for myself. I begged God to spare me, not you. Gasps erupted. A woman clutched her rosary so tightly it snapped. Mothers covered children's ears, though their eyes remained locked on him. No one moved. No one left. They listened, transfixed, as if chained by the words. Inside, Anselm screamed. He clawed at the lectern, but his body betrayed him. His mouth continued, spilling confessions he had buried, each more damning than the last. Clara did not vanish. I swallowed her voice. She confessed for me. The crowd rose in a wave of panic, yet none could leave. The heavy doors slammed shut of their own accord, bolts falling into place. Candles guttered, casting shadows across the pews that writhed like serpents. And still his voice carried, louder, stronger, preaching not salvation but damnation. "I am the sin of this house. I am the rot behind its walls. And today, you will hear what cannot be unsaid." The crucifix above the altar cracked, wood splintering with a sound like bone breaking. Dust rained down. The carved Christ's lips parted, just a fraction, but enough to silence the room with terror. The last words thundered from Anselm's mouth, though they were not his own. "This is not his sermon. This is mine." The church erupted into screams, but the doors would not open. And Anselm, trapped within his own body, realized with horror he was no longer priest, but puppet. Episode 11, The Mirror Behind the Cross. When the congregation finally broke free, when the church doors slammed open by some unseen mercy, Father Anselm remained frozen in the pulpit. Their screams echoed down the street, but he did not move, could not move. The last words still clung to his lips like ash. By nightfall, silence returned. A silence so heavy it seemed to press the walls inward. Exhausted, Anselm staggered toward the altar, his eyes drawn upward to the crucifix that loomed over him. That was when he noticed it. Behind the wooden Christ, half hidden by candle soot and age, a small mirror gleamed. He had never seen it before, though he had stood at this altar 1,000 times. His steps dragged as he climbed, trembling fingers brushing the frame. The glass was old, warped, its surface rippling as though it held water instead of reflection. At first it showed only himself, hollow eyes, lips cracked, gloves stiff with unseen stains. But then his reflection knelt. Anselm froze. He had not moved. Yet in the mirror, he dropped to his knees, hands clasped as though in desperate prayer. His lips began to move. No sound escaped the glass, but he could read them, word by word. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." It was his own mouth, his own confession. The mirror was dragging his silence into speech. Anselm stumbled back, but the reflection leaned closer, pressing its face to the other side of the glass. Its eyes burned with fever. Its lips split wide in a grin he did not wear. Then, without warning, the voice filled the nave. Not from his throat, not from the walls, but from the mirror itself. "I am your other tongue, the one you silenced. I will confess until the glass shatters." A crack spider-webbed across the surface, jagged as lightning. With each fracture, new faces flickered inside. Parishioners long dead, their mouths open in endless confession. Elias among them, eyes black with water, smiling through broken teeth. Anselm's knees gave way. He crawled down the steps, but the mirror glowed brighter, cracks bleeding light like wounds. The reflection was no longer him. It was the shadow that walked the altar, grinning, kneeling, confessing. And then, as the last candle extinguished, the mirror whispered his fate. "When the glass breaks, so will you." Episode 12, The Confession, written in blood. Father Anselm avoided the mirror, covering it with a heavy cloth torn from the sacristy. But even hidden, it pulsed behind the veil, cracks glowing faintly like veins filled with fire. He knew it waited for him, biding its time. So he turned his prayers to the walls instead. He paced the nave, sprinkling holy water, muttering blessings until his tongue was dry. But the church no longer echoed his prayers. It echoed only the scratching of stone. He found the first words at dawn. Across the back pew, carved deep, fresh enough to glitter with wetness. "I watched him drown." Anselm's breath caught. He staggered forward only to find more, along the pillars, across the floorboards, on the altar itself. "I locked the doors. I prayed for no one but myself. I let silence bury them." But these were not the pale grooves of dust and stone he had seen before. These letters bled. Crimson seeped from each word, dripping down like tears. The scent of iron filled the air. Anselm tore at his gloves in horror. His hands were wet again, sticky with the same blood that poured from the walls. No matter how he wiped them, the stains deepened, soaking into his flesh. Then he saw it. One final line, scrawled in great letters across the wall behind the crucifix, written as though the church itself had screamed it. "Confess." The crucifix above groaned. Wood split. For the briefest moment, Anselm thought Christ himself shifted against the nails, head turning toward him with eyes no longer carved but watching. The church trembled, pews creaking, rafters groaning. Blood trickled down from the word, dripping onto the altar steps where he knelt. And with every drop, he heard the voice of Elias, clearer, closer, heavier. "If you do not confess, Father, the church will do it for you." The walls shivered, and more letters burst across them in lines of red. Only these were not past sins. They were words he had not yet spoken. They were waiting, forming themselves from silence into scripture. Father Anselm fell forward, choking on his own breath. The church no longer needed his tongue. It had found its own. Episode 13, The Demon That Called Me Father. The word confess still bled across the wall when Father Anselm fled to the sacristy, desperate to escape the suffocating stench of iron and smoke. But the church followed him. The whispers pressed through the stones, through the air, through his very bones. He could not outrun them. That night, as storm winds lashed the stained glass, he felt the presence enter, not from the doors, not from the shadows, but from within. His chest tightened, his breath shallow. The confessional rattled though it had been chained, and the cloth over the mirror flared as if caught in invisible fire. Then the voice came, not through walls, not through wood, through his own mouth. "Father." The word twisted his tongue. It was not his voice. It was Elias's rasp, born from his throat. Anselm collapsed to his knees, clutching his stomach as if something clawed its way up. His lips stretched against his will. "You made me. You birthed me in silence. Every prayer unsaid. Every truth locked behind your teeth. I am your child." "Father." "No!" Anselm screamed, his voice breaking through for a fleeting second. "You are no son of mine." But the reply was merciless, layered with laughter that shook the rafters. "Who else could I be? You nursed me with cowardice. You cradled me in lies. You baptized me in fear. I am your sin given flesh, your silence given tongue." The crucifix above the altar split clean down the center, Christ's body falling in two. From the broken wood, black smoke poured, writhing across the nave like serpents. And within that smoke, a figure took form, long-limbed, its face shifting between Anselm's own and the drowned visage of Elias. It stepped forward, barefoot across the stones, leaving no sound but the hiss of blood seeping from the cracks it crossed. "Call me by my name, Father," it said, smiling with Anselm's teeth. "Call me what I am, your confession." Anselm's rosary snapped in his grip, beads scattering like spilled bones across the floor. His prayers failed him, the words tangled on his tongue. And then the figure leaned close, its breath colder than the grave, and whispered the most damning truth yet. "I do not want absolution. I want inheritance." Episode 14, The Trial Before Heaven. The storm did not relent. Thunder rolled like a gavel above the church, and lightning carved jagged veins across the stained glass. Father Anselm stood trembling before the altar, the demon child of his silence grinning in the shadows. Then the church began to change. The pews shifted with a groan of old wood, aligning themselves like rows of seats in a courtroom. The altar warped into a judge's bench, towering and merciless. Candles flared alive on their own, casting harsh light across the nave. And from the dark they came. One by one, figures filled the pews, faces pale, dripping with river water, coughing plague into their hands. Bones twisted from falls that never should have happened. Parishioners Anselm had abandoned, or ignored, or betrayed. They sat in silence, yet their eyes burned with testimony. The demon's voice carried like a herald. "The trial begins." Anselm shook his head, stumbling back. "This is madness. These are shadows, illusions." But the first witness rose, a boy with hollow eyes, his neck bent at an impossible angle, his lips parted, and though his body was broken, his voice was clear. "He watched me fall. He heard my scream, and he chose silence." The congregation of the dead murmured in agreement, a sound like wind through graves. Next came a woman, her skin gray with rot, her breath rattling. He locked the doors. We begged for mercy. He prayed only for himself. Anselm clutched his chest. "I was afraid. I am only a man." But the demon silenced him with a smile. "And yet you called yourself Father." Voices rose together, a chorus of accusations. The air shook with the weight of them, every sin dragged into light, every silence broken into confession. Then the judge appeared, not a man, not God, but the shattered crucifix itself, Christ's wooden face split in two, fused together into something new, eyes that glowed like fire, a mouth that opened to speak. "Father Anselm," it intoned, voice like thunder cracking stone, "you stand trial not before heaven, but before your own silence. What say you?" Anselm fell to his knees, tears streaking his face. Words tumbled from him, desperate, broken. "I confess." The demon leaned close, whispering as the gavel of thunder struck above. "Too late, Father. Confession is not forgiveness. It is inheritance." And as lightning shattered the last of the stained glass, Anselm saw every soul he had failed rise to their feet, not to weep, but to sentence. Episode 15, the final confession that wasn't his. The church was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a tribunal of shadows, of voices, of sins that wore human faces. The dead crowded the pews, their eyes hollow, their mouths whispering in 1,000 tongues, yet all spoke the same word: confess. Father Anselm knelt before the broken crucifix, his body shaking, his lips torn by prayers that would not rise. He had confessed. He thought he had confessed everything. The chalice, the plague, The boy, Clara, his silence, his cowardice. Every hidden wound laid bare before this dreadful court. But still, the voices pressed closer. Still, the demon child stood smiling in the aisle, its face flickering between Elias's drowned features and Anselm's own reflection. "No, Father," it said softly, almost tenderly. "Not enough. There is one sin left, the first sin, the root." Anselm's eyes burned with tears. "I have given you all I am." The figure stepped forward, laying a hand on his shoulder. The touch was cold, but it was also familiar. "Then let me remind you." The mirror above the altar tore its cloth away as if by unseen hands. The cracked glass flared with light, showing not the present, but the past. A boy, 12 years old, kneeling at the orchard's edge with dirt-stained hands, the chalice hidden beneath the soil, his lips sealed tight, refusing to confess. That was the seed. That was the moment the silence took root. The glass fractured further, showing the boy grow into a man. Each silence, each unspoken truth, each cowardice feeding the shadow until it stood now in full form before him. The first silence was not against them, the demon whispered, its voice inside his very bones. It was against him. "You chose yourself over truth, and I was born." The church shook violently, the dead rising from the pews, their mouths opening wide in a scream that was not sound but judgment. Anselm clutched his chest, his rosary shattered, his voice raw. "Then take it! Take all of me! Let it end!" The figure leaned close, lips brushing his ear. "It will not end. Confession does not erase. Father, it records. And now, your voice is mine." With that, the shadow stepped into him. No struggle, no resistance. It slid into his skin like ink into water. Anselm's scream was swallowed, and when he stood again, the church fell silent. The pews were empty. The dead were gone. The storm had ceased. Only one figure remained at the altar, Father Anselm, yet not him. His eyes glowed with a darkness that pulsed, alive. His lips curled into a smile that was not his own. He raised his hands over the empty nave and whispered the words that sealed it. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The church answered with silence, and the silence belonged to him.
Epilogue: the silence that remains. The church stands abandoned now. Its doors hang crooked. Its stained glass lies shattered across the ground like broken tongues of light. Villagers cross themselves as they pass, whispering that the place is cursed. They say prayers die in its walls, that the air itself swallows words before they reach heaven. But some nights, when the wind pushes through the orchard and rattles the chains of the confessional, the church is not silent. Travelers speak of voices rising inside, low at first, then swelling into a chorus of overlapping whispers. They hear a man's voice above the rest, reciting sins with relentless precision. Not in sorrow, not in hope, but in devotion. I locked the doors. I let the boy fall. I prayed for myself. I swallowed her voice. I became silence. Those who dare to enter say the altar no longer holds the crucifix. In its place hangs a mirror, cracked and veined with shadow. And if one stares too long into its depths, they do not see themselves. They see a priest kneeling, lips moving, confessing endlessly into the void. Father Anselm's name has been stricken from the parish records. His grave was never dug. No body was ever found. And yet, when midnight tolls, some swear they see him walking the nave, gloved hands clasped in prayer, eyes dark as unlit candles, whispering confessions that are not his. Because in that church, sin is never forgiven. It is only remembered, and the silence remains.